Hello, everyone. Welcome to Maverick Citizens' Food Justice podcast series called What's Eating Us? My name is Zugiso Pigoli, and I'm a journalist at Maverick Citizen. Food justice is a term that encompasses many areas: food security, food systems, food sovereignty, food literacy. But it also describes a movement and commitment towards securing everyone's right to safe, healthy, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. In South Africa, an estimated 30 million people have been classified as being moderately to severely food insecure and are facing malnutrition. The problem is multi-layered. It includes food scarcity as a result of increasing prices, big food business squeezing smaller food producers out of the market, and the proliferation of ultra-processed foods resulting in non-communicable diseases. Over the past year, Maverick Citizen has worked with seasoned health journalists Laura Lopez-Gonzalez and Nadal Salkis, focusing on several areas of investigation, including how big food gets around industry regulations of what constitutes healthy and nutritious food, how front-of-package labeling can help people understand the dangers of ultra-processed foods such as fried foods, salty snacks, biscuits, canned goods, sweetened cereals, ready-made cereals, and sugary drinks, and how direct marketing to children is fueling malnutrition and non-communicable diseases. Maverick Citizen has covered several cases of malnutrition in children, with a recent report by Black Sash showing that 30% of South African children live in households below the poverty line. This results in malnutrition and stunting, which not only affects child development, but also stunts adult development and can be passed on to their children. Amnesty International's 2021-2022 Global State of Human Rights report also warns of how big commercial farmers impede people's food sovereignty and ability to grow their own food by encroaching on agricultural land that is not theirs, leaving people without land to grow their food. The Competition Commission has found that despite the crippling economic impact of COVID-19 on people's ability to work, food prices remain high, reportedly the highest they've been in a decade. This means access to food is curtailed, particularly among the poor, on essential items such as wheat, fruit, vegetables, milk, oilseed, beef, and chicken. This has also had an impact on the proliferation of UPFs, as they provide a convenient, cheap, and tasty alternative to now expensive healthy foods. But can ultra-processed foods really be called food when they threaten the lives of millions of people, causing non-communicable diseases such as obesity, hypertension, and diabetes? In 2010, the World Health Organization, recognizing the dangers of UPFs, particularly to children, published a set of recommendations for marketing food and non-alcoholic beverages to children, which countries are meant to observe. Among the document's key recommendations are that the policy should be to reduce the impact on children on the marketing of foods high in saturated fats, trans fatty acids, free sugars, or salt. All policy frameworks should include a monitoring system to ensure compliance with the objectives set out in the national policy using clearly defined indicators. The policy frameworks should also include a system to evaluate the impact and effectiveness of the policy on the overall aim using clearly defined indicators. The peer-reviewed International Journal of Health Policy and Management published a paper in 2021 using South Africa as one of its case studies. It found that while sales of UPFs have stalled in high-income countries, in low to middle-income countries characterized by large populations, sales are climbing and contributing to a rise in NCDs. This means big food companies are making profits from selling unhealthy food and beverages in low to middle income countries, while placing the country's already burdened health systems under even more strain with non-communicable diseases. In South Africa, 4.5 million people between the ages of 20 and 79 were established to have diabetes in 2021, with 52.4% being undiagnosed. The paper also shows how big food has entrenched its presence within medium-income countries through establishing global production and hyperlocal distribution networks, scaling up its marketing, challenging government policies and scientific expertise, and co-opting civil society. The paper says that the consumption of ultra-processed foods has often been labeled as purely lifestyle and behavioral choices, and not often attributed to the efforts of big food companies to sell their products through manipulative marketing, packaging, and political influence over legislators. Research in South Africa showed that increases in overweight and obesity rates have been mirrored by high and increasing per capita ultra-processed foods and ultra-processed beverage sales. Per capita, ultra-processed beverage sales increased by 55% between 2006 and 2019, with a further rise of 12% anticipated by 2024. Similarly, ultra-processed foods sales per capita increased by 29% between 2006 and 2019. While this is largely due to expansion into townships and informal settlements, the paper also shows that one of big food companies' modus operandi is the tactical sponsorship of corporate social responsibility projects in communities, partnering with government departments like basic education, sports and recreation, health, and agriculture. Another aspect influencing the proliferation and buying of ultra-processed foods is the seductive marketing of these to children, specifically using bright colors, emotive references like happy families, and representations of the joy that comes with these foods, considered to be treats and aspirational. Social media has also made the regulation of this marketing that much more difficult, as it is not as regulated as traditional media. What our investigations have shown is just how vulnerable the public is to profit-hungry big food companies. Many people don't fully understand what goes into their food or what is listed on food package labeling. For example, while food companies are mandated to list the ingredients, few people grasp the impact of the ingredients on the body, as this is not explained. For all the talk on industry regulations around marketing and labeling, what has become apparent is that the law alone will not help us out of this health threat. What is needed is a societal shift in thinking, a reprogramming, if you will, of what we consider to be good food. Food literacy is an under-discussed topic that needs to take roots in schools and within families to build sound eating practices that will counter any efforts from big food companies to influence and profit off people's bad food choices. What research has discovered is that bad eating habits formed in childhood are carried through into adulthood, and the converse can also be true, in that developing good eating practices from a young age is likely to carry through in adulthood. This is why it is important to arm ourselves with knowledge, but also advocate for everyone's right to food justice. Food policy is also a key component in food justice, and to set the scene on this, Dr. Tracy Ledger, author of An Empty Plate, Why Are We Losing the Battle of Our Food System, Why It Matters, and How We Can Win It Back, explains it to us.
What I think are the main obstacles towards the kind of policies that would facilitate and accommodate a much more equitable food system. And I think that there are hundreds of little details that are around urban land use management. They're around the way in which corporates are regulated in the market. There are issues around access to market space, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that those really are more the symptoms of a much deeper structural underlying problem. And that structural underlying issue is the way in which the problem, in capital letters, of food insecurity is understood by policymakers, whether those people are sitting in the Department of Agriculture, whether they're sitting in the Department of Trade and Industry, whether they're sitting at the Competition Commission, rural development, land reform, whatever. And that fundamental issue is that these policymakers, by and large, do not see food insecurity, child malnutrition, all of the other issues we have to deal with. They do not see this from the point of view of the lived reality of people who are experiencing the issues. The people who are making policy around food insecurity, land use, agriculture, have not got the faintest idea of what the lived reality is of people who suffer from food insecurity, mostly because they never spend any time engaging with them. And because of that, they don't understand where the systemic problems are. They don't understand where the systemic barriers are that have to be addressed. So they keep making policy that's got nothing to do with actually solving the problem. What happens is people sit and they either engage consultants or they make assumptions about things or whatever, and they assume what the solution is because they've assumed what the problem is. And let me just give you a couple of examples of that. So we have this constant mantra in food security policy that we're going to fix food security in South Africa by producing more food. Whereas 99% of people in South Africa access food with money. So this kind of assumption that you can grow more maize in the Eastern Cape and it's magically going to appear as maize meal on the table of a hungry family in Tembisa indicates complete and utter ignorance of the basics of how the food system actually works. I mean, I'm constant. Sorry, I get quite irate about this. I'm constantly left astonished that you can spend 20 years making food security policy without the faintest insight into how the system actually works. So that's problem number one. The second thing is down to the actual lived reality of people who are in the system. Okay, so this idea, for example, that we must subsidize fresh food and we must encourage people to cook in a certain way, whatever, is completely ignorant of the way in which people live their lives. A woman who gets up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work, she's not going to cook breakfast for her children at 4:30 in the morning. I mean, this is ridiculous. And then she gets home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. What's she supposed to do? Stop at the supermarket, buy a whole lot of groceries, come home and cook dinner at 7:30 at night. I mean, this is absolutely ludicrous. If you don't have access to a reliable electricity source, you can't store food. Okay, so this is why there's a great deal of ready-made food that is consumed in a lot of these communities, because it actually is the cheapest and most convenient option. But there's no discussion about how we subsidize or support ready-made food in the industry. We have all this droning on about how parents are supposed to feed their children. But we never think about the way in which children actually navigate the landscape. And that's the other point. Food insecurity in South Africa is primarily an urban issue. It's not a rural issue. Even though food insecurity rates in rural areas are higher, there are much more food insecure people in urban areas because of urbanization and higher levels of urban poverty than there are in rural areas. But we still insist that in most of our policy that somehow food insecurity is a rural issue and needs a rural solution. It doesn't need a rural solution. It needs an urban solution. This is the other huge thing that is missing from the gap. If anybody would just actually take a trip around Tembisa or Ivory Park or Diepsloot or Khayelitsha, they'd work this one out. So the point then is also about child's nutrition. Okay, so everybody talks about the school feeding scheme. Okay, the point of the fact is that children are only in school, even under a normal non-coronavirus time, for half of their lives. So what about the other half of their lives? How are they supposed to eat then? The other point is that children only arrive in the official schooling system at the age of 7 normally, when all of the damage that's going to be done by childhood malnutrition has already been done. The way in which meals work for ECD centers is basically designed to exclude the poorest, most vulnerable communities because of the way in which the system is structured, that it's the ECD center that's got to apply for the subsidy, that's got to show that they've got a kitchen, that health and safety, and all sorts of things. A complete lack of imagination. So back to this woman who gets up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. Because she's not going to cook food for her child or children at 4:30 in the morning, she gives them a bit of money to get something to eat on the way to school. So where do these children, what are the spaces that these children navigate? Well, they walk to a taxi rank where they buy something to eat. What are their options? Vet cook. You know, there are no other options for this child to access nutritious food. Then the child goes to school where he or she may or may not get a vaguely nutritious meal. After school, when the child goes back home, he or she doesn't go back to their house because, I mean, townships are dangerous places for small children. The children tend to congregate around the spaza shops where they eat some of those lovely yellow chips again with some more money because there are no other food options. So, you know, talking to parents about what children must eat and what they must do is completely ignorant of the way in which people actually navigate the food system. So what we need to do is not be lecturing people on what they should be eating or how they should be eating. It's for policymakers to get a better understanding of what people's actual lives are and to structure interventions that fit with those lives. Not expect people to have some kind of mythical lives that don't exist, that will fit the parallel reality that policymakers have made. So all of the things about whether our agricultural policy should look like this or the competition commission should look like that, this is all periphery to the fact that we have to start from a particular point of view. And a particular point of view is the lives of the people that we are aiming to improve through food security legislation. If we actually are not bothered to understand the day-to-day lived reality of those people's lives and their interactions with the food system, why do they make the food choices that they do? Not because they're kind of ignorant, as, poverty is not the same as stupidity, but a lot of policy making in South Africa just starts from the assumption that all poor people need is, a little bit of like education, which is complete nonsense. Why are people making the decisions that they do? And a lot of those decisions are very marginal, and you don't know about them unless you go and sit and talk with people. I worked with a master's student a couple of years ago who was investigating exactly this issue, the choices that people make for their children. And it's not that people are ignorant of what's nutritious for their children. It's a cold hard fact they can't afford it. And these are very marginal decisions. So one woman was telling my student that she knows that sugar beans are much more nutritious than quick cooking pap. But the paraffin that it costs to cook the sugar beans as opposed to the easy cook pap is beyond her budget. These are the types of marginal interventions that we're having a look at. So this is why a much bigger subsidy on cooking fuels would have a huge difference, but we won't know that unless we go out there and spend time with the people whose lives we're trying to impact. So I think I'm going to stop there because that's my main point. That's what policy has to be based on. It can't be based on the input of only of people like me. I've never had to work out how I'm going to feed my family the next day. I've never lived in an informal settlement and tried to work out where I'm going to get food from or how I'm going to do it. So why does my opinion, why does my input count for more than someone else's? And I mean, everyone in this room knows that this is like a South African thing, but until we get out there and start documenting people's lives and understanding that we need food systems. I mean, we talk about food sovereignty as culturally appropriate food. But I think there's another aspect to it. It's a food system that's appropriate to people's actual lives, not the lives we think they should have in some textbook or in some policy document. I mean, the people that are assumed to exist in government's food security policy, well, they don't really exist. I mean, you find me the household that's actually going to benefit from that policy. They don't exist. It's not real. It's not reality.
This was an introduction to our food justice podcast series called What's Eating Us? Tune in next week for our first episode where we discuss food literacy with food justice expert Nzama Mbalati, health journalist Laura Lopez-Gonzalez, and health lawyer Safura Abdul Karim. My name is Zugiswa Bigoli and I'm a journalist at Maverick Citizen.